Today I'd like to talk about the Gospel of Matthew and start us off in chapter 21. The Gospel of Matthew is listed first in the listing of the four Gospels in most translations of the Bible, of the Christian scriptures. But probably it was written secondly. We think Mark was probably written first because Matthew contains so much of Mark, and then Luke next, and finally John. Matthew starts out with a genealogy in chapter 1, verses 1 to 17, kind of to set the scene as to who Jesus was, how Jesus came to be, what the purpose of Jesus' mission was. It's interesting, he starts the genealogy with Abraham. Luke is going to start his genealogy in a different way. It's kind of good to know the family tree of someone, isn't it? And this is what Matthew is giving us. He tries to show Jesus as the fulfillment of Jewish history. So Matthew's audience seems to be a mixed audience. There seems to be some Jewish people involved, Jewish Christians, but also some Gentiles, so kind of a mixing of different groups in the early church. But his genealogy kind of sets the stage of saying, well, Jesus is really rooted in, comes out of Jewish history. The genealogy is a little bit different in that it pictures four women who bore children in strange and unexpected circumstances. And it's really going to set the scene for Mary, who is going to bear a child in a very unusual circumstance as well. The first one is Tamar, who gets her father-in-law Judah to produce an heir by deception, produces Perez and Zerah, who continue the Davidic line. She's the only woman, interestingly, in the Hebrew scriptures who is called righteous, which is a very important term in Matthew, this term righteous. So Tamar exemplifies a woman who is a righteous woman, a woman who tries to follow the law to the best of her ability. Rahab is the second woman who's mentioned in the genealogy, and she is a prostitute in Jericho who risked disobeying the orders of the king of Jericho and sheltered spies from Joshua. Joshua sent the spies to check out the land. She subsequently gives birth to Boaz, who is the great-grandfather of David. So very different type of situation with regard to Rahab. Then we have Ruth, and Ruth is a Moabite woman, so she's a foreigner. She's not of the Jewish lineage. She's a Moabite woman who returned with her mother-in-law Naomi to Bethlehem rather than to stay with her own people after her husband Mahlon had died. So she went with her mother-in-law. Ruth presented herself to Boaz, and she conceived Obed, who carried forth the Davidic line. So again, this connection, both Rahab and Ruth have this connection with David. So emphasizing the sense that Jesus was from this line of David. He's from the line of Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, but also the great King David, continuing the Davidic dynasty. Then you have Bathsheba, who is the wife of Uriah. She bore David's son Solomon after David arranged to have Uriah killed in battle. So we have these unusual circumstances in terms of giving birth. And so these four women are mentioned to show the importance of women, because a lot of times in genealogies women would not be mentioned. So it shows the importance of the women. And of course Mary is going to be an exemplar of that. Very important woman. And the idea that birth can take place in very unusual circumstances, very different circumstances, but that those births can have a tremendous impact in terms of the future. So again, it shows us the importance of honoring birth, of honoring children, of honoring this lineage. Might be a little bit different, unusual, but we honor it and celebrate it. And of course, we have the birth of Jesus with Mary as a virgin mother, which really is to emphasize the creative act of God, that Mary conceives a child through the power of the Holy Spirit, not in a sexual sense, but in the sense of God achieving this birth. Jesus is referred to as the son of David. Jesus is considered to be the royal Messiah. Jesus is referred to as the son of Abraham. Jesus is for all nations. As Abraham was the father of all peoples, Jesus is going to be for all nations. Asaph and Amos were introduced into the genealogy to show that Jesus fulfilled prophecies of the Hebrew scriptures. Some feel that Amos was maybe a misprint, but others claim that this is to show the importance of the prophecies, with which Matthew is going to emphasize very much in his gospel. Matthew is concerned with 14 generations. 14 is the numerical value of the Hebrew letters that form the name of David. So that could be one explanation for the 14. Another is it's also the double of the number 7, which is the number of perfection in the Hebrew Bible. So it's sort of saying that these generations represent double the perfection. In the birth of Jesus, Matthew 1:18-25, we see the virginal conception is the work of the Spirit of God, not intended, as we said, in a sexual way, but really to describe the power of God, the awesomeness of God. It talks in this section about the betrothal. Betrothal was the first part of the marriage. It constituted a man and a woman as husband and wife. So when they were betrothed, they were husband and wife. Infidelity was considered to be adultery. The betrothal was followed several months later, or up to a year later, by the husband taking his wife into her home. A normal married life would then commence. Joseph was a righteous man. He was an observer of the Mosaic law, again righteous as Tamar was righteous, unwilling to expose her to shame. The consequences of adultery could be stoning to death, and Joseph did not want that for Mary. The angel of the Lord then comes to Joseph and communicates God's message, God's thoughts. And the angel of the Lord is a lot of times used for that concept of God communicating with the human being. Also, the angel appears in a dream, and perhaps to recall the dreams of Joseph in the Hebrew scriptures. So the son of Jacob, Joseph, was a dreamer and interpreter of dreams, famous for that. So we have Joseph in the Christian scriptures also getting these dreams. The message is, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. This echo that we're going to hear in the scriptures a lot. The angel comes, the voice of God comes to Joseph and says, do not be afraid. It says you are to name him Jesus, the Hebrew name Joshua, the Greek Jesus, meaning Yahweh helps, was interpreted also as Yahweh saves. The prophecy that is given by Isaiah in chapter 7, verse 14, about the young woman who would conceive is referred then to Mary conceiving Jesus. Jesus is Emmanuel, he is God with us, and this God with us theme is also found at the end of Matthew's Gospel. So we have it here at the beginning, God is with us, Emmanuel. We also are going to have it at the end of the Gospel. It says he had no relations with her until she bore a son, and this is to emphasize that Joseph was not the father, that God was the father.